Deadly shooting at a child's birthday party over the weekend. 4 people died, including 3 children. Fox's Amalia Roy joined us live from Stockton with new details on the search. And Amalia, big development today. We understand that there may have been multiple suspects involved.
Yes, good evening, Marla. The San Joaquin County Sheriff's Department says that they are looking at multiple shooters possibly being involved. And from the outset, when I have heard him speaking, talking about there being possibly more than one gun.
Saturday night, a little girl's second birthday. Balloons floating, children laughing, over 100 guests gathered for a moment that should have been pure joy. Then in the span of seconds, the room erupts, and not with cheers. Parents screaming, children running, chaos swallowing a night meant for celebration. When the silence finally settles, 4 never return home, and 11 are left injured. This is the story of a tragedy that happened on November 30th, 2025, in Stockton, California. Welcome back to Crime Mystica, where we dive deep into the cases that shake our communities and remind us of the fragility of safety. If you're returning, thank you for being here with us as we continue to shed light on these important stories. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with others who want to stay informed. Most importantly, stay safe out there, and let's get into today's case. Stockton, California. A city of over 300,000 people located in the Central Valley, about an hour and a half east of San Francisco. It's a place where families have deep roots, where communities celebrate together, where neighborhoods know each other's names. But like many American cities, Stockton has struggled with its share of challenges, economic hardship, and unfortunately, violence that has touched too many lives. Saturday, November 30th, 2025, the weekend after Thanksgiving. For most families, this is a time of lingering holiday warmth, of spending time with loved ones, of celebration. For one family in Stockton, this particular Saturday was extra special. Their little girl was turning 2 years old. The venue was a banquet hall on Lucile Avenue, not a fancy ballroom or an upscale event space, but the kind of place where everyday families gather for the moments that matter most. Quinceañeras, anniversary parties, birthday celebrations, the kind of place where you can fit everyone you love under one roof. And on this evening, that's exactly what this family had done. Over 100 people had gathered to celebrate this little girl's milestone. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors. The guest list reflected a family deeply connected to their community. Children ran around playing, their laughter echoing through the hall. Adults chatted, caught up on life, enjoyed each other's company. Tables were decorated, music played, food was served. The birthday cake sat ready, candles flickering. Everyone began to gather around, phones out to capture the moment. The traditional singing was about to begin. It was approximately evening time, the party in full swing, energy high, joy filling every corner of that room. No one could have imagined what was about to happen next. The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. The crowd gathered closer, forming a circle around the table where the birthday cake sat. Cell phones were raised, ready to capture the memory. The birthday girl, just 2 years old, was likely beaming with excitement, surrounded by everyone who loved her. Someone began the countdown. The singing was about to start, and then in a split second, everything changed. Gunfire. Loud, rapid, unmistakable. The sound of shots being fired tore through the banquet hall, cutting through the anticipation like a blade. The moment that should have been filled with the voices of loved ones singing "Happy Birthday" was instead filled with the sound of violence. Chaos erupted instantly. Screaming, people dropping to the floor, scrambling for cover, desperate to protect their children. Parents grabbed their kids, trying to shield them with their own bodies. Others ran toward the exits, pushing through the panic, trying to escape the danger they couldn't fully see or understand. Tables overturned, decorations scattered. The music that had been playing moments before was drowned out by the sounds of fear. Some people couldn't run, some people couldn't move. In those seconds of violence, lives changed forever. When the shooting stopped, an eerie quiet fell over the scene, broken only by crying, by calls for help, by the desperate voices of people trying to find their loved ones in the confusion. Emergency calls flooded into dispatch, multiple callers reporting shots fired, reports of people down, reports of injuries. The Stockton Police Department and emergency medical services rushed to the scene on Lucile Avenue, arriving to find absolute devastation. First responders entered the banquet hall to discover a scene no one should ever have to witness. This wasn't a crime scene at a bar or a street corner. This was a child's birthday party. Balloons still floated above. The birthday cake sat partially destroyed. Children's toys were scattered across the floor. And among the decorations and the remnants of celebration, there were victims. Multiple victims. As paramedics worked frantically to save lives, as police began securing the scene and trying to piece together what had happened, the true scale of the tragedy became horrifyingly clear. 4 people had lost their lives, 11 others had been injured, some critically. 4 families would not be going home complete that night. 11 more would be rushing to hospitals, praying their loved ones would survive. The little girl whose second birthday they had all gathered to celebrate would never remember this day the way it was meant to be remembered. Instead, November 30th, 2025 would be remembered as one of the darkest days in Stockton's history. A birthday party had become a crime scene, a celebration had become a tragedy, and an entire community was about to be changed forever. Behind every number, behind every statistic reported in the news, there are real people, real lives, real families who woke up that Saturday morning with no idea it would be the last normal day they'd ever have. 4 people lost their lives that night. 3 of them were children. An 8-year-old, a 3rd grader who loved karate, who had dreams and ambitions. In just 2 weeks, she would have turned 9. 14 days she would never see. Her family is left with memories, photographs, and an empty room with her things exactly where she left them. A 9-year-old, their identity kept private out of respect for the family's wishes. 9 years of laughter, of learning, of growing. 9 years of being someone's whole world. Gone in an instant. A child who should be in 4th grade right now isn't. A 14-year-old, standing at that delicate threshold between childhood and adulthood, old enough to dream about the future, to think about who they wanted to become. Maybe thinking about high school, about college someday, about all the possibilities ahead. All of that, every potential moment of joy and discovery, stolen. And one young adult, 21 years old, barely into adulthood. 21 is when life is supposed to be opening up, full of opportunity and adventure. That story ended on a banquet hall floor, surrounded by birthday decorations. 4 lives. 4 families who will never be whole again. 4 empty chairs at dinner tables. 4 futures that will never exist. But the tragedy didn't end there. 11 others were injured, some critically, requiring surgeries and long hospital stays. Others may heal physically, but the trauma stays. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the fear that grips you in crowded spaces, those invisible wounds are just as real, just as painful. Think about the other children who were there. The ones who survived but saw things no child should witness. How do you help them feel safe again? Think about the parents who threw themselves over their children, trying to shield them. The ones who couldn't get to their kids fast enough. Even if their children survived, the guilt and fear don't disappear. In the days after, the community rallied. Vigils were held, flowers piled up at memorials. GoFundMe campaigns raised money for funeral costs and medical bills. At school, empty desks became shrines covered in drawings. I miss you. You were my best friend. The innocent handwriting of children trying to process a loss even adults can't comprehend. These weren't just names in a headline. These were real people, someone's child, someone's friend, someone's whole world. People who deserve to grow old, to chase their dreams, to live full lives. They can't, because someone brought guns to a 2-year-old's birthday party. As families mourned and the community struggled to process what had happened, law enforcement faced a monumental task, finding out who was responsible and bringing them to justice. The Stockton Police Department immediately launched a full-scale investigation. Detectives descended on the banquet hall on Lucile Avenue, treating the birthday party venue as what it had now become, a major crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the area. Evidence markers were placed. Investigators photographed every detail, collected shell casings, documented the trajectories of bullets, searching for any piece of evidence that could lead them to the shooters. But this wasn't a typical crime scene investigation. This was complicated in ways that made the work even more challenging. There were over 100 witnesses, 100 people who had been in that banquet hall when the shooting started, 100 different perspectives, 100 different vantage points, 100 different experiences of the same traumatic event. Some had seen the shooters clearly, others had only heard the gunfire and hit the ground. Some had been focused on getting their children to safety and saw nothing at all. Many were in shock, their memories fragmented by trauma and fear. Detectives began the painstaking process of conducting witness interviews. They needed to piece together a timeline. Who arrived when? Where were people positioned in the room? When exactly did the shooting start? How many shooters were there? What did they look like? What were they wearing? Which direction did they come from? Which direction did they flee? Every witness account mattered, but trauma has a way of distorting memory. Some people were certain about details that conflicted with what others remembered. Some couldn't remember anything clearly at all. It's a well-documented phenomenon. When your brain is in survival mode, when adrenaline is flooding your system, when you're focused solely on staying alive, your ability to process and retain details becomes compromised. Still, investigators worked through the night and into the next day, interviewing as many people as they could, trying to construct a coherent picture of what had transpired. The big question everyone wanted answered was, why? Why would someone target a child's birthday party? Who were they after? Was this random, or was someone in that room specifically marked for violence? As the investigation progressed, law enforcement began to develop a theory. This wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't someone who just snapped and started shooting. Authorities came to believe that this was a targeted attack. Someone at that party was the intended victim, and the shooters had come there specifically to carry out an attack. Even more troubling, investigators believed this was gang-related. Gang violence has been a persistent problem in Stockton for years. Cycles of retaliation and revenge that claim innocent lives in the crossfire. The working theory was that someone at that party had gang connections and rivals had decided to strike, regardless of who else might be in the room. Regardless of the fact that there were children present, regardless of the fact that this was supposed to be a celebration of life, not a place of death. Hours after the shooting, there was a development. Stockton police arrested 5 individuals on weapons charges and gang-related offences. The arrests were made in the aftermath of the tragedy, and the timing seemed significant. Were these the shooters? Were these people connected to the attack? The answer, frustratingly, was unclear. Authorities couldn't immediately confirm whether these 5 arrests were directly connected to the birthday party shooting. It was possible they were involved. It was also possible that they were arrested for unrelated charges in the sweep that followed the incident. The police weren't saying much publicly, likely to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. What was clear, however, was more troubling. As of Monday afternoon, December 2nd, 2 days after the shooting, no one had been charged specifically with the attack itself. The shooters were still out there, still free, still a threat. The search continued. Detectives followed up on leads, analysed evidence, worked their sources in the community. They appealed to the public for information, asking anyone who saw anything, who knew anything, to come forward. Tips began coming in, but separating credible information from speculation and rumour was another challenge entirely. For the families of the victims, the wait was agonising. Their loved ones were gone, and the people responsible were still walking free. Every day without an arrest felt like another injustice, another wound that wouldn't heal. For the Stockton community, the lack of arrests raised a terrifying question. Could this happen again? If the shooters were still out there, if this was indeed gang-related retaliation, would there be another attack, another act of violence? Would anyone be safe? The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And everyone in Stockton was waiting, hoping, praying that justice would come soon. While investigators worked around the clock to find answers, the city of Stockton was reeling. This wasn't just another headline. This wasn't just another statistic. This was personal. This hit home in a way that shook the entire community to its core. In the hours and days following the tragedy, Stockton residents came together in grief and solidarity. Vigils were organised where community members gathered to light candles, share memories, and support the families who had lost so much. Strangers embraced. People who had never met the victims showed up anyway, because the pain was collective, because when children are taken in such a senseless way, it affects everyone. Memorial sites appeared near the Banquet Hall on Lucile Avenue. Flowers, balloons, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes piled up as people paid their respects. Gone too soon. Angels watching over us. Justice for the fallen. The messages reflected a community struggling to make sense of something that made no sense at all. For the schools that lost students, the grief was especially devastating. Teachers and counsellors worked to help children process the deaths of their classmates. Grief counsellors were brought in. Parents had difficult conversations with their children about violence, about safety, about why bad things happen to good people. Empty desks became shrines covered in drawings and letters from friends who missed their classmates. Fundraising efforts launched immediately. GoFundMe campaigns were created to help the victims' families with funeral costs and medical expenses for those who survived but faced long recoveries. The community rallied financially, understanding that grief comes with practical burdens: hospital bills, funeral arrangements, time off work to heal and mourn. But beyond the vigils and the fundraisers, there was anger. Righteous, justified anger at what had happened and at the broader problems that allowed it to happen. Stockton Mayor Christina Fugazi didn't mince words in her response to the tragedy. She called the shooting an act of terrorism, not in the traditional sense of political or religious extremism, but terrorism nonetheless. The deliberate targeting of innocent people, the use of violence to instill fear, the complete disregard for human life. If that's not terrorism, what is? Mayor Fugazi went further. She publicly requested federal assistance to address the gang violence that had plagued Stockton for far too long. This wasn't the first incident, but perhaps a 2-year-old's birthday party being turned into a war zone was finally the breaking point, enough to demand more resources, more support, more action from higher levels of government. The mayor's message was clear. Stockton couldn't do this alone anymore. The cycle of gang violence, the retaliatory attacks, the innocent lives caught in the crossfire, it required intervention beyond what local law enforcement could provide. Federal resources, federal expertise, federal coordination, all of it was needed to break the cycle and make the community safe again. Residents echoed these sentiments. Community leaders spoke out. Parents demanded answers about how their children could be protected. If a birthday party wasn't safe, what was? If a banquet hall full of families wasn't off limits, what was? There was frustration directed at the broader systems that had failed. How had things gotten this bad? How had gang violence become so normalised that shooters would open fire in a room full of children without hesitation? What had broken down in society, in the community, to allow this to happen? Some pointed to the need for better gang prevention programs, for resources that give young people alternatives to gang life. Others called for tougher enforcement, for stricter penalties. There was no single answer, no easy solution, but everyone agreed that something had to change. But amid all the policy discussions and calls for systemic change, the focus kept returning to the same place: the victims, the 4 lives lost, the 11 injured, the families forever changed. They were the reason everyone was gathering, speaking out, demanding better. They deserved justice, they deserved to be remembered, and they deserved to have their deaths mean something, to spark the kind of change that would prevent other families from experiencing the same devastating loss. Stockton mourned, but Stockton also refused to accept this as normal, as inevitable, as just another tragedy to move on from. The community was hurting, but it was also mobilising, organising, demanding that November 30th, 2025 be a turning point, not just another date in a long history of violence. The community's outrage and demand for change weren't coming from nowhere. They were rooted in a painful reality that Stockton had been grappling with for years. This tragedy, as devastating as it was, didn't happen in a vacuum. It was part of a larger, darker pattern. Gang violence had been an ongoing issue in Stockton, a problem that law enforcement and community leaders had been fighting against for years, with varying degrees of success. Cycles of retaliation, turf disputes, and rivalry-driven attacks had claimed lives before. But there was something about this particular incident that felt like a new low, a line crossed that shouldn't have even existed. As investigators pieced together what had happened, their working theory painted a disturbing picture. This was targeted. This was planned. Someone at that birthday party was marked, and the shooters came specifically to carry out an attack. The fact that it was a child's birthday party, that there were over 100 innocent people present, that children running around playing, none of that mattered to whoever pulled the trigger. That's what made this different. That's what made this feel like terrorism, as Mayor Fugazi had called it. There used to be unwritten rules, even in gang violence. You didn't target families, you didn't shoot up birthday parties, you didn't put children in the line of fire. But those rules, if they ever truly existed, seemed to have disappeared entirely. The question that haunted everyone was simple but profound. Why? Why would anyone think it was acceptable to bring violence into a space filled with children celebrating a 2-year-old's birthday? What kind of hatred, what kind of disregard for human life, what kind of desperation or rage drives someone to do that? If the theory was correct, that this was gang-related retaliation, it spoke to how deeply broken the cycle had become. Violence begets violence. Someone is attacked, so their crew retaliates, then the other side retaliates for that retaliation, back and forth, an endless spiral where the original grievance gets lost and all that remains is the need for revenge. And somewhere along the way, innocent people become collateral damage. But collateral damage is too sterile a term for what happened on November 30th. These kids who lost their lives were not collateral damages. They were loved, and they were stolen from their families because someone decided that revenge was more important than innocent lives. The tragedy also raised serious questions about community safety. If this could happen at a birthday party in a banquet hall, where was safe? If over 100 people gathered for a joyous occasion could be targeted, what gathering was off limits? The psychological impact of that realization rippled through Stockton. Parents became more cautious about where they took their children. People looked over their shoulders at community events. Trust eroded, replaced by fear and hypervigilance. Just about one shooting. This was about what that shooting represented. A complete breakdown of the basic social contract that says some spaces, some moments, some lives are sacred and untouchable. Mayor Fugazi's call for federal assistance wasn't just political rhetoric. It was recognition that the problem had grown beyond what local resources could handle. Gang violence, when left to fester, doesn't stay contained. It spreads, it escalates, it normalizes the unthinkable until shooting up a child's birthday party becomes just another tactic in an endless war. But the broader conversation extended beyond Stockton too. Cities across America have struggled with similar cycles of violence. Different places, different gangs, different circumstances, but the same devastating outcomes. Communities torn apart, families destroyed, children growing up in fear. The Stockton birthday party shooting became part of a national conversation about how to break these cycles, how to intervene before violence becomes the default response, how to create pathways out of gang life for young people who see no other options. But while the bigger picture mattered, while the systemic issues and policy discussions were important, they couldn't become abstractions that distance people from the immediate visceral reality of what happened. 4 people were gone, 11 were injured, families were shattered, a community was traumatized. That was the bigger picture that mattered most, the human cost of violence that had been allowed to spiral out of control. So where does all of this leave us? Where does it leave the families waiting for justice? Where does it leave a community demanding answers? As of the most recent updates, the investigation remains active and ongoing. The Stockton Police Department continues to work the case, following leads, analysing evidence, and pursuing every possible avenue to identify and apprehend those responsible. But the hard truth is this: despite the 5 arrests made on weapons and gang-related charges in the hours following the shooting, No one has been taken into custody specifically for the attack itself. The shooters who opened fire at that birthday party, who took 4 lives and injured 11 others, remain at large. That reality is difficult for many to accept. Days have passed since November 30th. The families of the victims have buried their loved ones or are preparing to do so. The injured are recovering in hospitals or at home, dealing with both physical wounds and psychological trauma. And the people responsible are still out there somewhere. Law enforcement has been careful not to release too many details about the investigation, and that's standard procedure. They don't want to compromise their case. They don't want to tip off suspects about what evidence has been collected or what witnesses have shared. They don't want to reveal investigative strategies that could allow the guilty to cover their tracks or flee. But that silence, while necessary, is excruciating for a community desperate for justice. Authorities continue to appeal to the public for information. They've asked anyone who was at the party, anyone who saw anything unusual before or during the shooting, anyone who has heard anything in the days since to come forward. Tips can be submitted anonymously. Even the smallest detail could be the piece that breaks the case wide open. The investigation involves reviewing surveillance footage from the area, if any exists. It involves tracking down forensic evidence, the shell casings, the ballistics, any physical evidence left at the scene. It involves working with informants in the community who might have information about gang activity and recent conflicts. It involves building a case that will hold up in court and lead to convictions. These things take time, but time is cold comfort when you've lost a child, when you're wondering if the people who did this will ever face consequences, when you're afraid they might strike again. The community remains on edge. There's an underlying fear that if this was indeed gang-related retaliation and the shooters haven't been caught, there could be further violence. Retaliation for the retaliation, the cycle continuing, more innocent people potentially in danger. Stockton police have increased patrols in affected neighbourhoods. They've increased their gang enforcement efforts. They're working with community leaders to try to de-escalate tensions and prevent further violence. But prevention is difficult when the people responsible for such a brazen, horrific attack are still free. Mayor Fugazi's request for federal assistance remains on the table. Whether that help will come, what form it will take, and how quickly it can be mobilised are questions still being answered at higher levels of government. In the meantime, the families grieve, the injured heal, and the community waits for arrests, for justice, for some sense that the people who shattered so many lives will be held accountable. The case is not closed. The story is not over. And everyone in Stockton is hoping that when the next chapter is written, it will be one of justice served and accountability delivered. As we close out this case today, it's important to remember what's at the heart of all of this. Beyond the investigation, beyond the policy discussions, beyond the statistics and headlines, there are people, real people, whose lives will never be the same. There's a family who planned a second birthday party and ended up planning a funeral. There are parents who will never tuck their children into bed again. There are siblings who lost their brothers and sisters. There are classmates who will grow up with an empty seat in their classroom, a constant reminder of the friend who should still be there. The victims who had a whole life ahead of them, they're gone, taken by violence that never should have touched them. The 11 people who were injured carry scars, some visible, some not. They survived, but survival doesn't mean you walk away unchanged. The trauma of that night will stay with them. The sounds, the fear, the chaos, those memories don't just disappear because the physical wounds heal. And then there are the dozens of other people who were in that banquet hall, the children who witnessed horror they can't unsee, the adults who couldn't protect everyone they love, no matter how hard they tried, an entire community that will forever associate November 30th, 2025 with tragedy instead of celebration. This case reminds us of something we should never forget. Violence doesn't just claim the lives of those who don't survive. It damages everyone it touches. It ripples outward, affecting families, friends, neighborhoods, entire cities. And when that violence invades spaces, the that should be sacred, spaces of celebration, of childhood innocence, of joy, the damage runs even deeper. The investigation continues. Justice has not yet been served, but the hope remains that it will be, that those responsible will be found, arrested, and held accountable, that the families will get some measure of closure, even though closure can never bring back the people they've lost. To everyone watching, stay vigilant. Stay aware of what's happening in your communities. Support the people around you. And most importantly, stay safe. Look out for each other. Protect the spaces where joy and celebration should be allowed to exist without fear. Thank you for watching Crime Mystica. If this video informed you, if it helped you understand what happened and why it matters, please hit that like button and share it with others. Subscribe to the channel so you can stay updated on this case and others we cover. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are real lives, real families, real communities that need our attention and our action.